Now to a public relations disaster for Britain's Prince Andrew. In a rare interview with the BBC, he tried to distance himself from convicted sex criminal Jeffrey Epstein.
It was for the first time that he spoke on camera.
There is new fallout from the new Prince Andrew interview about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein.
Buckingham Palace fighting back and fighting hard as the sex abuse scandal against Prince Andrew intensifies.
A controversy shaking Britain's royal family. Prince Andrew accused in a lawsuit of inappropriate relations with an underage girl.
He also drew into question whether or not the photograph of the two of them together was in fact fake.
The prince's answers only raised more questions.
Unless you've worked in an environment where you're mixing with upper echelons, we're going to call them the upper echelons of society. I'm not saying they're any better than you or me, because they're clearly not. A lot of them aren't. But I'm talking about the super high net worth people and the government officials and presidents and prime ministers and all these people that, you know, they've got a different outlook on life than me and you. We're just normal people. But that environment is a very strange environment in terms of the way the upper class perceive right and wrong, because clearly they're running circles where they can get what they want whenever they want. And this is the point of what's happened with Epstein. Epstein is clearly an individual that enjoys power and enjoyed power and enjoyed, you know, manipulating and child sexploitation for his own benefits and sharing that out by the looks of it with others. But never thought that anything was going to come of it. And I think part of that confidence would have come with being a member of the royal family. The times and the things that I've said and will tell you, I was in company with other police officers. So it's not like I was on my own and it cannot be corroborated. What I'm saying is the officers that I was with are too frightened to come forward to corroborate it, but they're certainly not going to come forward and deny it. I think when you look at Prince Andrew, there's not a lot of people out there who are actually telling the public or telling people what he is really like as the person off duty. People see him and other members of the royal family on the telly, waving and smiling. But behind closed doors, certainly from my experience with Prince Andrew, it's a totally different kettle of fish.
It was always going to be a disaster for a simple reason. When you're not telling the truth and you cannot explain yourself in a way that isn't sinister, then you have to lie. And if you lie, especially in this situation, then your lies better be pretty damn bloody good, and you better be pretty damn bloody bright. And unfortunately for him, neither of those is true. And therefore, it's clear that he has no defense from what he's accused of. I mean, once we are into situations where the defense from having sex with an underage girl is not sweating, not going out in London without a shirt and tie, and going to a pizza restaurant, I mean, it's crazy. And that's an interesting point, which some people have made. These people don't go anywhere in public without a security operation, which logs the movements. So if Prince Andrew can account for his movements to prove that what's said is not true, then in that BBC interview, he would have said, well, just hold on a second. Here's the logs.
Everything he said in that interview, or a lot of it, was just rubbish, complete rubbish. First and foremost, he was lying. And I detailed this in the interview I gave with Ian in relation to the travel arrangements and the Pizza Express story. Well, if that was a genuine sort of visit he was going on with his daughter, which is another member of the royal family, so you've got at least 2, maybe 3 members of the royal family, you don't just turn up to Pizza Hut and queue up, or Pizza Express and queue up in the queue, do you? what would have happened is he'd have had a protection officer would have gone down there, who would have booked the tables, they would have been cordoned off, and then that would have been ready to go. So he'd have been out the car, straight to the booth. They would have done checks. They would have spoken to the manager of the Pizza Express and saying, listen, we're bringing a principal down here. So that everyone would have known what the situation was. What would have happened is there would have been a record of that visit. Officers' entry in the notebooks, maybe a security assessment they would have done on that because it was an actual visit. And as I explained the reasons why they would have done that. But those notes they can be kept between 6 and 30 years. So there's potentially a chance that there would have been notes that would have corroborated Prince Andrew's story. But then that doesn't mean to say he wasn't in Tramp's nightclub 4 hours later. So if a member is such as Prince Andrew, because he's like one of the main members of the royal family, is going abroad, what would happen is it would all be pre-planned. So the Royal Protection Command would contact the local police force, which would have been the New York police, I should imagine. But also, they've probably got government protection. I think they have government protection officers because I'm sure they were with Prince Andrew on the Epstein visit. Is subsequently transpired. So what would happen is we would give them the address of where Prince Andrew was staying when we're coming. The team's coming. And they would do the necessary checks on the premises and the people within those premises. So they would check the freehold to see who owns it to make sure it's not, I don't know, a gangster or, whatever else. And in this case, it was Mr. Epstein. So obviously they would have checked out Mr. Epstein's details had Andrew had given them. If he hadn't, his details would have still come up on the freehold for the property. So obviously they would have checked out Mr. Epstein in their police computer and it would have come up that he was a convicted child sex offender. So the security stroke threat assessment that the Americans would have done and passed back to us would have noted all that in there, would have said that this is not a suitable address for a member of the British royal family to stay at for the reasons listed. And obviously they would have explained Epstein and whatever else, the convictions. So that information would have then been passed to Prince Andrew directly through his personal protection officer, or it could have been done through the commander. And they would have basically said, we advise you not to go stay with this gentleman in these premises. So when I talk about paperwork trail, you've had emails back and forth. You may have even had written letters back and forth, but you certainly would have had emails from the Americans back to us with their advice. And then there probably would have been a security meeting with Royal Protection. What I mean by that is the commander would have sat down with the officers, protection officers, and said, right, this is the report, this is what we've got. We've analysed it. We need to advise Purple 41, which is Prince Andrew's code name, against visiting this person. That would have been done. Anyone who says that would not have been done is lying or don't know anything about security. So that information would have been passed to Prince Andrew. So Prince Andrew would have said, no, I'm going, and refused to listen to the advice given. That would have been noted on the notes by the Royal Protection Command that he refused. Well, why did you refuse when you was told clearly? Because for some reason, he felt the need to go over, and in his own words, which was just rubbish, 4 days to say goodbye to someone. I'll be quite frank there. If that was anyone else, a normal person, and they found out a friend of theirs was a convicted child sex offender, you'd ring them up, say, delete my number and fuck right off and put the phone down, wouldn't you? It's as simple as that. That is the sum total of the conversation you would have. Because I've seen him sweating, and again, I documented it, and I've spoke about this, that he would come out in the garden and play golf, hit his golf balls up the garden, which on one occasion, it was an occasion where I needed to be on the phone and I couldn't because he'd come out the garden entrance and was now with his protection officer who was carrying his golf bag. Prince Andrew was playing. It was a really hot day on that day, and he was whacking golf balls up the end of the garden. He was sweating profusely.
If you talk to anybody about liars, they come up with extraordinary details. And anybody who says, well, I don't sweat much, is just really weird stuff. The biggest problem for Andrew and the royal family is that it's public. It's not that he hangs with pedos or has hung out with pedos and became incredibly friendly with pedos or may potentially be involved with the trafficking of young people. It's the fact that it's exposed to the public gaze. That's the problem.
Because there's so many pictures out there. In fact, there's more pictures of him partying than there is at charity events, which is what I've said on my Twitter feed as well. You know, he says, "Oh, I wasn't so much of a party anymore." Well, let's go back through all you've got to do, Your Highness, is go on Google and Google yourself, and you'll find a lot more pictures of you at parties than you are at, charity events. But obviously, Prince Andrew spent 4 days apparently saying goodbye. Now, the problem he's got as well is to say that he did it out of respect or whatever to go over there. Well, what
he was so honourable.
That was it. Did the honourable thing. But I'm sorry, what you just did there was trashed every survivor of child sex trafficking, child sex exploitation, and any survivor of child sex abuse, which gives you an indication as to what his mind, which is important now, his mindset, how he ticks, how he thinks, because now you know that he's very careless and he doesn't understand about human life. So that shows you that he doesn't care.
I can't see how we can recover from this. Once you have cut somebody off in terms of royal duties, because he can't explain a relationship with a horrific paedophile and procurer of children and trafficker of children, unless at some point he can say, here's the proof, I didn't know anything about it, which ain't going to come. I can't see how you can justify saying, okay, it's long enough now, come back. Because don't think people would have it.
He wanted to tell in person Mr. Epstein that he couldn't have contact with him anymore because he had engaged in conduct that was unbecoming. Unbecoming? Mr. Epstein had been convicted of sex crimes involving children.
Virginia said that he was in an orgy with underage girls. So there's massive public pressure on the FBI to do something about this. Supposedly, because we've got these stories in the tabloids and in the news, and we don't know what's real, what's not real. Supposedly, Virginia is the target of an FBI investigation right now, but Prince Andrew is not. But the lawyers of the victims are requesting that they speak to him, and if he touches down on American soil, he's going to get subpoenaed into court, and all this stuff all this legal stuff's going to get thrown at him.
I mean, what I'd say is, and this is potentially a key, right, to the fact that he's not going to be subject to any subpoenas or any indictments, is because if you're involved in an investigation or you're being investigated, you're knowingly being investigated, would you go on telly and talk about it knowing that you could be potentially indicted? You wouldn't, unless you knew that you weren't. The reason being is you keep your mouth shut until the investigation is over and done with. You don't go on telly and give an explanation, because all you're doing is you're giving information to the opposing team that they can then use against you when they actually do decide to arrest you and say, well, you said this and this isn't correct. Because that interview he gave, I pulled it apart myself. All right. And for him to have been with legal advisors, he would have had a legal team around him. And they would have, if they thought there was a possibility of any indictments coming his way, they'd have shut the idea of him doing the interview down. So he must have had some guarantees that this isn't going anywhere for him to publicly speak. Any lawyer worth his weight in gold would tell his client, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, because potentially there's an investigation that you may be involved in. But obviously he's been given a guarantee from whoever that, that nothing's going to happen with this.
The people assume that the royal family are somehow these kind of like the Queen is some harmless old lady with her handbag and everything and her blue rinse or whatever, but this is an incredibly powerful household. And it's not even just the family at the core of it, but it's all of, the people around it who enable the House of Windsor to function, per se. So they all have vested interest, and they have a vested interest in Andrew not going down, because if Andrew goes down, that is problematic for the whole family.
And so when you hear, for example, I'll quickly say this, when you hear a spokesman said or a close friend said, no, there is no close friend, that's the press office putting out a narrative out there for you to soak up.
They're even saying, oh, that's a doctored picture, that wasn't him, he wasn't there. Of course, because this is what the establishment does. So what I have definitely learned over the last few weeks is, one, the newspapers are deliberately writing fake headlines about Andrew being estranged from the royal family.
How does that benefit the royal family?
It benefits the royal family because it makes it look as though they're taking paedophilia or anybody associated with them seriously. And that is an absolute nonsense. The royal family have never taken paedophilia seriously. In fact, Andrew is just one of them by being mates with a paedophile, because that's what they've been doing for an awful long time.
Because you talked about Jimmy Savile last time.
Jimmy Savile, Dickie Mountbatten, Prince Philip's uncle, Bishop Ball, who was Prince Charles's mate and a renowned paedophile. So these people have no problems being around abusers. Andrew is not being ostracised at all. It is to make it look like the royal family are taking this most seriously and honour you, the citizens. No, you don't.
Because Andrew showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. They obviously analysed that and then said, all right, we've got to put out now that we're disciplining him to show that we take this seriously, to get the public back in our favour.
Absolutely.
What has been done in terms of the Queen cutting off Andrew is kind of presented as the Queen acting decisively because of, things that Andrew was possibly involved in and all that stuff. In other words, the Queen kind of cares. You mustn't have done this. You shouldn't have done this and all this stuff. No. What she's saying is, Andrew, you shouldn't have got caught, right? Which is a very different thing. Because you'll remember that recently an ABC television anchor, what we call a presenter or news presenter, was on a live mic being filmed, but it wasn't for air. She was talking to people in the gallery, I think. And it was leaked by, to Project Veritas. And she described that she had the Epstein story 3 years earlier. And she had Clinton, she had Prince Andrew and all this. And ABC wouldn't air it. And one of the reasons, she says in this leaked video, was threats from the royal family. So the royal family couldn't give a damn about abused kids. They give a damn about getting caught being involved with them.
The royal family always need the support of the public. Always. And they get it unconditionally, generally. And still, I mean, the fact is if half of the things had happened with any other family that we know that's happened with the royal family, they would cease to exist as an entity. So the royal family are very cherished within the established England. That's the reality of it. And the British people, by and large, want to believe that the royal family are sort of pure creatures, right? We have this idea, we know that we have this idea that anybody who's been through a sort of public school system, we automatically assume that they must be less of a criminal than somebody who's been to the local comp. We do that. That's in our culture. We've been raised to believe this notion. And so that's why they keep getting away with it. So no, Andrew has not been ostracised. He's not been alienated. He's very much in the bosom of the family. Tell you who gave away the clue was Fergie, because Fergie made very clear that not only did she not care about any victims, but that her only concern is for Andrew. And why? Because she's at the trough like all of them. And I'll tell you something else that one of the editors said to me, is that the only thing they're upset about at this moment in time is that Beatrice won't get her big wedding like Eugenie did. That's the only thing that they're really concerned about at this moment in time. And some of the PR effort is to enable, them to clear the way for that. The most important thing is to maintain the firm, and that's what they're doing. So that is by any means necessary.
So everything that I'm saying there is 100% what I saw and what I heard, nothing more, nothing less. So Prince Andrew, his main sort of problem was with us was the amount of females that would enter the palace and not follow security procedure. And as I said to you, that is an issue for the reason I've outlined, because you do get people coming up to the front of the palace and saying, I'm here for the Duke. And they're actually quite mad, and they're not. So how do we know one time a person's come up and says, I'm here for Prince Andrew, but they're not really there, and we just let them in? Who's going to end up walking the beat in Brixton? It's going to be me. There wasn't any that I would say were younger than that. They were definitely in their 20s, and they were definitely some of them were 15, 20 years younger than Prince Andrew. It's obviously, it's not just my opinion, it's the opinion of other officers that I work with, that he obviously had a taste for younger women. We just get a call, there's a taxi coming with 2 female guests for Prince Andrew, same protocol, just open the gates and let the taxi straight through into the quad. So we had to go and open the gates of the quad because they're shut at night for security. So open the gates, taxi pulls up, there's 2 scantily clad females. I emphasise the word scantily clad because they had short skirts, very low cut tops, heavy makeup, and they were drinking cans of Coke, giggling and laughing. Now, the reason I'm picking up on that is because they're coming to see a member of the royal family, as opposed to going to a nightclub, which is a slightly different sort of, place you would go when you're dressed in that sort of attire. So it just seemed out of place for us. And my colleague, he was of the opinion that it was late, it was the night, and we're police officers, we have a laugh and a giggle, and his opinion was they were prostitutes and they looked like prostitutes, or it started off with they looked like prostitutes from the Chelsea Harbour Club, because apparently there's a high-class escort agency running around that area.
He's not going down. I doubt they'll even be able to get him up for a police interview. And that was the other thing. Why was he being interviewed by the media rather than by the police? And the problem about that, there are problems about being interviewed by the media before you're interviewed by the police, as we've seen by people who have come forward and said that they were abused by politicians. When they were interviewed by the media first, it was a lot easier to rubbish their claims. But not just that, there are also legal issues, because if you've said all this publicly, how are we then going to get you into a dock and say it? You can't, because then they'll then say this is all played out in the public sphere. It's not a fair hearing. There are many reasons why it made sense for him to do that interview, but it backfired.
But as I said, and I'll stand by my guns, that Prince Andrew is not going to be indicted for anything. I'm pretty certain of that, given the stuff that I've not talked about everything within the palace and what happens there, but given what I know about the royal household and the way mechanics work and the way the establishment works, because let's not forget, I was part of that establishment at one stage and I was doing their bidding, as people would say. I was turning a blind eye. Yes, I was. That's fine and dandy. But from what I know, I can honestly say that I cannot see Prince Andrew, for the reasons I've given as well. Obviously, speaking publicly, if you're looking at being arrested for something, you're hardly going to go on telly and start talking about it, because obviously that's your story's full of holes. And if you're going to change your story, it's too late.
Virginia said she had sex with Andrew 3 times. And the third occasion, even though she was 18, it was an orgy with underage girls who'd been procured from Eastern Europe and they could barely even speak English. Mm-hmm. And Epstein was boasting that these are the easiest girls, to get in his sick manner. So basically, she said that Prince Andrew was in an orgy with her, with children. Even with that level of allegation, do you think nothing will ever happen to Andrew? Do you think the royals are completely untouchable?
Pretty much. Isn't that awful? I mean, pretty much. It's awful. I mean, this stuff keeps me awake at night. The sheer injustice of how somebody can steal a bottle of water from Lidl and be banged up for 6 months, right? And you can go around and you can be raping children and you can be murdering children. And I do believe this has all taken place and nothing is done about it. I do believe that the royals are above the law. Yeah.
London is built up of, I think it's 26 boroughs. And each borough in London's unique in as much as it's not one policing district, it's 26 policing districts. And when you look at the canals, they're so old, the old parish boundaries are built up around the canals and the River Thames. So if you take sort of like where Wapping is, that's in the borough of Tower Hamlets, but if you go into the middle of the river, you're then in the borough of Southwark. So the River Thames is tidal and moves about too fast, but the canals don't, and canal boats are all right to live in. So certain parts of London, there was a collection of paedophiles. So you'd get them around Hackney, Southall. And when I overlaid a map on top of it, I found out that these were areas where 3 boroughs were meeting. So the canal boat, in effect, could be here. And then literally a canal is only 3 metres wide, some of them. You cross over on your 27th day onto the other side, you're in another borough, and legally you're not going to get caught. The paedophile unit had got information from a prison, that in order to get away with being released and not becoming a registered sex offender, what you got to do is you've got to get a canal boat, and if you get one in London, they ain't going to touch you. And kids like boats. And what do they do with special needs respite? They take them on boat trips. I mean, we had one of our paedophiles that we was watching. He'd got himself on a boat that would take kids day outs from Camden to the zoo, and he was put in charge of toilet duties. I mean, you couldn't make it up. So what the paedophile unit said to me, look, we're going to get you seconded to us, right? We're going to sponsor you. We've got 2 sex offenders. We think there's probably another couple. If you can find another couple in the next couple of months, brilliant, we'll keep this going. Anyway, in the first month I found 90. It was quite easy, to be honest. British Waterways are the biggest landowner in the country, and they had a phenomenal database, so I had access to their database. I got their names and dates of birth, and that's how I found out they were paedophiles, and it was just incredible. And then I started cultivating informants, and it was amazing how many of them were helping out special needs kids, kids from kids' homes. Well, what happened then was that names started cropping up of certain people, and these are names that have come out on the PI list, which has come out, the Paedophile Information Exchange. They were involved in boats mainly around the Richmond area, and they've come out just sort of subsequently in the press. I think linked to people like Peter Heyman and things like this. These names started cropping up, and that was it. It got shut down. And I came into work one day, and my chief inspector said, ever so sorry, but your secondment's finished. I went, well, no, it hasn't. I've been promised that I'm here, and I built my life around it, my schedule around it, and and everything. And he said, no, it's come to an end. And I said, oh, come on, be fair. And he went, look, it's come from high up, John. It's come from high up. There's nothing I or anyone can do about it. We're grateful. We can never thank you enough for what you've done. But unfortunately, these things happen. Right now, the strange thing is, there was a very, when I say senior inexperienced detective from the paedophile unit that was working with me. And he said, John, this happens all the time. And he said, and said the name of an MP, we've had him twice, this MP, prominent Tory MP.
You're allowed to say that name?
Well, he is dead. His initials are LB. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, he said twice that that they had him, and on both occasions the plug was pulled. And he said it will happen again, and it will happen to you. And sure enough, it did happen to me. So this was the first time I realised a so-called conspiracy exists, and it comes from high up. All the time, it comes from high up. And one day was out, and there was a little girl there, and I was told by this other woman that there were a couple of young girls at work in the area, and because she was on heroin as well, she looked a hell of a lot younger. And I got her, but we would deal with them as victims. And I was told, and this is part of my statement, to get rid of her because she had scabies, that she would contaminate the car, and then you'd have to take them back to the police station and put them in a certain room. That would need cleaning as well because she's got scabies. She's a pain in the arse. She'll only be doing it tomorrow. Tell her to F off. To a 14-year-old girl. And I started looking into this and started recruiting some of the girls as informants, strictly for the child prostitution side of it. These kids that have been in care homes have had a shitty life to start with, and when they came forward and speak out, they'd just be cast as a liar, so they'd put it on their record. And with the new legislation they brought in 2003, the Criminal Justice Act of bad character, they can use that information. So whenever they come forward in later life, say, I was abused by this person, that person, and I totally believe them, they're discredited instantly by the court, and it's done deliberately. Anyway, I went up to this kid's home in Cambridgeshire, and I sat down with this little girl, and she was a bit of a horror, but God bless her, she's dead now. She died in mysterious circumstances, and still a kid at the time when she died. I went to see her, and she started explaining. She said, look, this one woman, street name of Foxy, is pimping me out. We knew Foxy. She'd been about on the street for a long time, and it was all around the Sussex Gardens area of Paddington. And she said she pimps me out for crack. Sometimes she gives me money, sometimes she takes me to posh restaurants. So one restaurant, I know they get £2,000 for me, and another place I'll go to a crack house and she'll get 20 rocks for me. And she gives me some of the rocks, and she was a little crackhead herself. And she said, but she gets me to get my friends involved. And one of my friends is involved, and I'll give you her name, and I'll tell you of others. So, and then she started introducing me to other girls, and other girls, and other girls, and other girls. And there was one girl, and this girl was a traveller. She was 9 years old when it was happening, 9 years old at the relevant time. And it was just horrific, and it was everywhere. Now, there was a judge that was involved, and this judge was involved with this girl, Foxy, and there was, we never got the name, but there was rumours of a senior police officer. There was someone that was high up in the BBC in the arts and music department. And the venues, they would range from upmarket, Curzon Street, Mayfair restaurants, which are the top echelons of that sort of scene. It was massive, but there was a barrister involved. Oh, it was going mad, it was going, and in the end, we were dozens and dozens of kids. They were coming forward by the day. It was hemorrhaging. This girl from Southall, a social worker, said, John, we've been going to your unit for 10 years. For the last decade, we've been pleading with you. She said, we've got girls that are turning up, young girls, kids. One girl, she's got so many cysts and abscesses inside her vagina that she oozes. When she comes in, she is dying. She said there's one lad, he is being pimped out. He is in the latter stages of HIV/AIDS. He is dying on his feet. He is still being pimped out. Your unit don't even turn up. She said, you've got to help us. You have to help us. So I wrote a very, very concise and factually based report, 2 paragraphs. I handed it in and to the intelligence unit. Within an hour, I got a detective inspector screaming down the phone at me, get to see me now. So I went in there, and he starts what we call fuck chucking. Who the hell do you think you are? You effing, you can't put things like this. And he said, you're demeaning the unit. We've been doing this for decades, and, who do you think you are? And it turned out that all these reports of these kids from the care homes, whenever the kids went missing and turned up in red light areas, were archived. And I found these reports went back a long way. So they'd known about it for at least 15 years. They knew about it. Anyway, he said, you're off the case. And I went, what, you can't kick me off. I said, this has become my life. He went, you're off it. It's shutting down. And he just belittled everything. So I then went to see the chief superintendent, and we sat down, and I said, Governor, I don't know what I've done wrong. I thought this was going to be a good thing. I really thought I'd given them the goose that's shitting the golden egg here, And he told me, he said, what the hell have you done? He said, this is going to F us. And I said the F word before, but I don't keep saying it. But he said, this will F us past, present and future. You have no idea how deep this goes. He said, if you mention a word of this outside of this room, he said, you will be thrown to the wolves. And he said, you will lose your home, your children and your job. He said, you've got no idea who and what you're dealing with. So that showed me how big this was, right? And so that was it. I was off, and I was scared, and I genuinely was scared. And of course, I'd seen it before with the canal thing, and I was told by the senior couple that this is what they'll do to you, and I knew it was political. And he said, you've got to have an undertaking that you never ever look into child prostitution again. I remember first going there, I was talking to the detective sergeant that runs it, and I said, do you have any problems with child prostitution? She went, oh, no, none. But she used to go to meetings with the social services about the child prostitution. And no, nothing's been, she did it for 2 years, nothing's been highlighted. So we've got a detective sergeant saying that in that borough, that inner London built up borough, that there are no problems with child prostitution, categorically saying it, and then saying that there was an officer dealing with it for 2 years, never come across one case of it. He said, you'll go to a meeting. So he said, it's a jolly. So if you go to a meeting, what used to call job and knock, go to meetings, go home. So I know now why this girl did it. So anyway, so with that in mind, she pisses off this sergeant, and I get the phone and I ring up social services. I knew someone there. I said, look, couldn't fax me through a list of the care homes. But it turns out that Haringey's got more care homes than any other borough in the UK. It's got 26, or it did have back then. And I got faxed through this list, care homes, right, with the phone numbers. And this is how it works, Sean. So I've been told 2 years, not a problem. I get the list and I start off care home number 1. So I dialed the number, picked the phone up, introduced myself, said no one's in any trouble here. I'm looking at this problem with children and prostitution. Goes quiet. I said, look, I'm here to work with you, my friend, and a lot of the poor staff that work there, it's not them, And on the whole, they had 5 children. So I said, how many children you got? I said, 5. I said, how many of them do you lose at a weekend due to prostitution? I went, 3. Right. And honestly, that was a timescale. Bang. So 2 years, Ethel. In that 4 or 5 minutes, 3 kids. Right. And that went on consistently. Right. So by the end of 3 days, I'd done all of them. I had 50 kids. So I then held a meeting. So I got all these support agencies and everything else, brought them all in, and social services. And I said, well, we need to sort this out. And I started talking to some of the kids, and some of them started working with me. Brilliant. And they started naming places where they were taken and everything else. And then there was a leading children's charity, the woman in charge of trafficking, this term they use, trafficking, and I want to go on about that in short, if I may, turned around and said, you're treading on toes. You think you know everything. She said, we've been looking at this for a long time. There's been a unit set up. There's a cop already looking at it. There's a superintendent looking at it. You're to back down now. And then a senior social worker in charge of child exploitation or whatever, she turned around and she said, what the fucking hell you done, John? She said, we've got now put in 50 care plans. I said, but you knew about these kids. She said, yeah, but while they were making money, they were quiet. And that's how it went on. And of course, then what happened, I had to go and see a superintendent, and I was panicking, thinking, oh shit, they're going to have me now. He told me to back away, said this detective's looking at it. I spoke to her, went and met her, lovely girl, and she said, I've been to 2 meetings. I've never even met any of the kids. How the hell could I deal with that? That was one borough in London. And these kids go missing. So they'll go missing on a Thursday and they'll come back on a Monday. They're usually worse for the wear through drugs and through sexual activity and coming down from it. And, so there'll be all health problems. Some of them will be bleeding. They'll all be high, and they'll be kicking off until the middle of the week, when they'll be looking forward to going out and getting their drugs again and then going back out to work again. And so when they say about kids going missing, yes, they go missing, but they come back. Now, the police units, they've got the missing persons unit, which take records of this. So they knew about it. That would be given to the child protection units. They knew about it. And if it was prostitution, it'd be given to the vice unit as well. Yet none of them were talking to each other. The vice unit wouldn't come to the meetings. So they knew about these kids, these failings, and did nothing. And all the time, money was being made, money. And then, of course, when you look at these kids that are involved in it, girls and boys, they will just start getting involved in crime, because there'll be antisocial behaviour, there'll be a lot of violence because there's a lot of anger, and then that will lead to the Class A drug addiction, which then goes way to the prostitution, to the street prostitution, to the shoplifting, the robberies and everything else. We've got kids, people in prison, the majority are coming from abused backgrounds. Not all of them, but they are. So really, I was right in what I was looking at. Now, I wasn't the first, and many have looked at this, but we all get shut up. We all get shut up. Now, of course, lo and behold, I moved, and I'm sent now over to the west side of London, and this keeps happening and keeps happening. And in the end, I did blow the whistle officially, and I had already done it, But then I made allegations of corruption, and I made sure my youngest was a little bit older and they couldn't really take my kids off me because I knew that they'd come for me. I made allegations of corruption against senior officers, saying they'd deliberately covered it up.
So John Wedger was somebody that I kind of wanted to help get that message out on social media. So I interviewed John, and then we kind of started interviewing people all around the country and running a Facebook page. And I was boosting a lot of these posters. It was doing very well. I mean, we were getting kind of a million hits a month, and lots of views. And then people were coming forward and saying, well, I want to get my story out. Michael contacted us through that page. John went to interview Michael Tarraga in January. So it was less than a year ago, January 2019. He was given £10,000 in compensation from Lambeth Council. It was called a harm's way payment for the abuse he suffered as a child. Now, with that £10,000, he spent £4,000 on publishing a book about his life story. It was called The Uncouth Lout. Now, he then gave that book away and asked for donations and gave the money to charity. He had no interest in making money. He just wanted to get his story out.
We were taken into care under the 1948 Children's Act, where the authorities had full legal and parental rights. We're taken all three on the same day to Boreham Wood, to what was charmingly known as family home. This was kind of kids' home, but allegedly run on family lines. The abuse then started on a regular basis. And when I say regular, 3, 4, 5 times a day. And then being passed around, taken to aunties and uncles in various places. And there was nothing I could do. I didn't know that it was abuse, but it was hurting. I was hurting. I couldn't go to school because my backside was bleeding at times. And I used to get beaten with a wooden spoon, which they made me go and get. You know, every word. I had nothing, no toys, no nothing. And my brother and sister were kept away. Oh, this went on for some time. Abused every day. There is an 8mm film of where they wanted me, well, they filmed me doing things to my sister, but things I didn't understand. Oh Christ, it was hundreds. I was taken to Eastbourne, I was taken to London, I was taken to Pimlico, to the three aunties' house. You know, I was being sold.
So this was a paedophile ring?
Oh Christ, yeah. Taken to the meat rack in Piccadilly, which still exists today. In fact, I went back with Sick Note, my pal, and we drove down a couple of years ago because I went to Lambeth to confront Lambeth. And we went down and I said to Sick Note, his name's Ian, I said, look, I'm going to show you something. And it was the tube station, but the Wimpy Bar has gone. Playland, the arcade, has gone. But I said, that is where they used to stand us up. And people used to come and pick us up. Not just me. There was lots and lots of children. Because you have to remember, post-war Britain, there were thousands of kids who had nobody, right? The parents had either been killed, bombed out, or just disappeared. And it was a different world, a total different world. And it was kind of strange. If you disappeared, who the hell was going to know you'd gone, you know? It was a strange world. We had no one to complain to.
How outrageous is this? That this man, this poor man, who was sexually raped, anally raped, as a child from the age of 4, almost every day, now gets £10,000 in compensation in his late 60s, and he spends nearly half of that on trying to get his story out. What am I doing as a journalist? What are my colleagues, professional journalists, doing by not covering these stories? And I felt this huge rage, righteous anger. I thought, I have to do something. We have to get his story out.
There were times when I was taken away for weekends and just passed around in a house. You know, I'd wake up in different beds. And this went on in the kids' homes. The kids' homes in London, your Shirley Oaks, your Hollies, Liscard Lodge, Stamford House, were hotbeds of pedophilia. The people who were doing the abuse were wealthy, suited people, but they were certainly managerial people, you know, civil servants, welfare officers, etc. It wasn't just the working class who were involved in this. This was high up people, police officers, judges, and that ilk of people, MPs. And I didn't know who he was at the time, was Edward Heath, who I was introduced on the boat as Uncle Teddy. You know, and I didn't, Teddy, who bloody hell's Teddy? You know, and it didn't occur to me for years. If he was alive today, they would question him under caution. So they believe, they know exactly what he was. This was a guy who was single, was a choir master, says it all. You know what I mean? So he's around boys all the time. And I'm not going to say he was a nasty piece of work, because he didn't beat me up, you know. They asked me on the boat, go swimming, go naked, right? And I did. I loved it, going naked. But afterwards, he took me into the little cabin, the saloon on this thing, where he dried me, you know, and fiddled about and kissed me willy and all that nonsense, and had me do the same to him. And really, it was a case of, well, if I don't do it, I'm in the shit, yeah. If I do it, I might get a fag and half a crown. And that's what happened. I might have got half a crown off him and a fag. I've had my own roll-ups, which I wasn't allowed to have at the time, but I had them because it was school holidays. So I just sat on the arse end of the boat and had a roll-up.
Mike Veal is a friend of mine. Mike Veal was the Chief Constable of Wiltshire. He is still coming under attack to silence him because of what he brought out about Ted Heath, the investigation that went on regarding Ted Heath, you know, and he's staunch in his approach, Mike Veal, and he's gone on to Sky News and said, I am 120% certain that Ted Heath was a paedophile.
Not surprisingly, lots of people attacked the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police at that time, Mike Veal, for having the courage to dig deep into this issue and not simply let it go away. He was attacked, accused of everything under the sun. It was quite desperate, you could see, to silence him. But he held on, and he produced this good and revealing report of the allegations against Heath of both child sex abuse and also of satanic abuse.
So let's take both Leon Britton and Ted Heath. Ted Heath was always cruising gay areas, you know, even when he was a backbencher, then a cabinet minister, and then in the forefront of Parliament. So everything he did, everyone around him would have been vetted to a high standard. So how is that man with such a questionable sexual history and a proclivity for the liking he did, the penchants, whatever, for young boys, which is what he had, especially those from the care homes, why was he allowed the prime position, the premiership of politics? Again, Leon Britton. Again, we got 634 MPs, right? How often do you hear in the paper about the MP for Widnes being involved in it, the MP for Loughborough, the MP for Cornwall? You don't. You hear the same ones all the time. It's the same ones consistently we are hearing time and time again. There was 2 coppers that were based in number 10. Back then, now it's part of the diplomatic thing. I think it was back then, it was just parliamentary protection or something. One of them was an ex-military guy, and they were removed because they kept seeing young boys were taken up into Ted Heath's residency 3 times a week, and one of them turned around and confronted Ted Heath because they thought if they tell their bosses, he said, well, what are they going to do about it? They're going to attack us, and it will carry on. So he confronted him. And I actually gave this information to the Home Secretary's office. I gave it to him. And I turned around and said, sir, this stops, and this stops now. And he said, fair enough. It did stop for 2 weeks, and then it continued, and then it continued.
Ted Heath, I was told about him by a series of people who, most of the people that had Ted Heath abused, the children, they didn't survive. Because Ted Heath had a very famous face, you know, the more people he abused who stayed alive, the dodgier it gets for his survival. And so they used to be killed, most of them. But I was told by a number of people, and it built up over a period of time, of what he did. And there was, I won't say what it is, because for obvious reasons, but when Wiltshire Police and the chief constable at the time, who has been not chief constable anymore, they kind of, you know, they got him removed eventually, because you don't take these people on if you're in the system and survive. But he, or the investigation team mentioned something when they were investigating Heath, that there was something that he did that was kind of, I would say, very, very strange. And that gave them sort of confidence that these people were telling the truth, because what they were describing was fantastic. And you really couldn't make it up. And you certainly couldn't make it up across several different people unconnected with each other. Well, I know what that was, because I was told by some of these people who claimed to be abused by Heath what he did when he was abusing them. And you absolutely could not make it up. If you sat here for the next hour saying, is it this, is it that? I just say no every time, because you wouldn't get it, because it's so fantastic. And that gave me confidence as well, because they were describing this particular way he did things that was so outrageous and yet incredibly consistent across all these people, formerly kids, that I was confident enough to go with it. And there was a journalist, well, what passes to be a journalist on the Isle of Wight, who, when The Biggest Secret came out in 1998, she called Ted Heath, who was still in the Parliament for another 7 years after this, and read him the passage. And all he said was, David Icke must be mad. That was it. And you see what I've accused him of? But never went anywhere, because they don't want this stuff in court.
The Rains list is, it's a list of people, very famous people in the media, actors, actresses, politicians, etc., names who had been given to Joan, who were said to be involved in satanic ritual abuse or the sexual abuse of children. It's an extensive list. I don't know the veracity of it, but having met Joan, I think that she would have compiled it in an extremely forensic manner. And what she told me was that she wasn't prepared to put anybody's name down on that list unless several independent people who didn't know each other said the same thing. What Joan was able to ascertain, which was very scary indeed, and in fact, it still makes me feel shivery to even recall it, was at least 5 of her children who had been sent to her, claiming to have been involved in some sort of abuse, had traumas, they named Edward Heath. But they said something really curious about Edward Heath. And none of them knew each other. And that's why I believe what she had to say. And what these children said was that when Edward Heath abused them, he used what was like a mechanical hand because he couldn't bear to touch them with his own hands. Now, 5 children said that independently. What are the chances? And that, I believe, formed a huge part of those revelations, the fact they were independent witnesses that convinced Wiltshire Police there was something worth pursuing.
One other thing, very quickly, one of the little tricks they do is when they're really in trouble over paedophilia and stuff, or whatever, stuff like that, they'll produce someone who doesn't tell the truth. They'll name the people that others are naming truthfully, and then they'll be exposed as a fraud. And in doing that, they seek to, and it works, they seek to discredit all those people who are telling the truth.
So the Carl Beach story, I mean, that all came out sort of 2 or 3 years ago, and he was deemed a credible witness. And he was working with, he was being interviewed by journalists, former mainstream media journalists who worked for a publication called Exaro, and they deemed him to be credible, and so did Tom Watson. It turned out, he gave his story about being sexually abused by VIPs. So, and then he was taken to court and found to be a liar and a fraudster and also a paedophile. And he got 8 years. Well, why didn't this come out sooner? And it was all over the papers. When he did get locked up, it was everywhere.
So I had a problem with Nick's stories from the beginning, because they came through an outfit called Exaro. And Exaro surfaced just after the Jimmy Savile, actually just shortly before the Jimmy Savile revelations. And Exaro's stock in trade was to take people's accounts and publish them all over the place. And they sold their stories to Sunday newspapers and TV and 60 Minutes in Australia. They made a lot of money. But it wasn't journalism as we know it. And I had a lot of problems with it because I felt, and I said about it right from the beginning, I said, if you keep putting out stories that are not fact-checked, it means that as soon as one is discredited, that everybody else will be discredited. And I said that 2013. I said it publicly, I said it on TV, I said it on radio, I've said it all over the place.
All of the newspapers and all commentary was around how the fact that this Westminster paedophile ring was all fiction. Apparently, it's all fiction, just because of this one particular situation with Carl Beach. And it just feels like they're insulting our intelligence.
And I knew there was a problem. And I said to people from the get-go, out of all the people who are surfacing, he's the one I have the most problem with. And I said it repeatedly, because it just wasn't making sense. I'm not saying he's lying. I don't know that. What I'm saying was that he was so easy to discredit because, like lots of child abuse victims, he wasn't able to think with clarity. He was over emotional. These are natural attendant behaviour patterns of people who have been abused. But the problem is, if you're going at it with just the aim of getting a story out, you're not taking care of how something's said, how much you had to push them to get to that point, and it wasn't proper journalism. As Lord McAlpine, who had been previously accused of being a paedophile and is now dead, had quite accurately said in his book that what you need to do is and I say this in Paedophiles in Parliament, I think you're probably aware of the point that I'm talking about, and that is what you need to do is you need to basically isolate somebody, you need to prove that what they're saying is wrong, and then the rest of the story will be discredited, which is what has happened. You cannot get a story about a suspected paedophile in parliamentary circles on air or anywhere near it for love nor money after Carl Beach. That's done. And that then became the narrative. So Carl Beach was inevitable. It was inevitable. It's done. The story's done now in the mainstream. I don't know an editor, and I have good friends in mainstream. I don't know an editor who will touch a story, and I go to them with good stuff. I can link them up to people who will take lie detector tests, will go through it all, are prepared to be forensically examined, but nobody will listen to them, what they have to say. But the media can no longer listen to them. Well, when I say can no longer, has taken an active choice that these people are attention seekers and they're all of the same calibre of Carl Beach and should just probably be ignored because they're wasting a lot of money at a time of austerity.
And now what you're seeing is people like Daniel Janner, which is Lord Janner's son, coming forward and saying we've got to stop these people from coming forward. So virtually saying that anyone who comes forward now has to be treated as a liar. Can you imagine what that's doing to the victim and survivor community? They must be absolutely screaming. We are dealing with evil people that not just want to have sex with children, but want to cover up for their friends and colleagues that are doing likewise. In order for us to get anything changed in Parliament, we have to go through these filters, and they sit as gatekeepers and don't allow it out.
But Geoffrey Dickens was a Conservative MP who had been given certain information, and he was able to pull together a series of files in which he cited people in parliamentary circles who may be abusing children. And he handed those to Leon Britton, or at least he handed one of those files to Leon Britton. Now, Leon Britton, if anybody knows, was also accused right up until his death of being a paedophile. And certainly there were accusations of him involved with Elm Guest House in southwest London. We certainly know that Cyril Smith was at Elm Guest House. There were other politicians at Elm Guest House, and there was abuse taking place at Elm Guest House. And so Geoffrey Dickens compiled these files, gave it to Leon Britton, the Home Secretary of the day, and essentially nothing was done of it. He was ridiculed. He had his office broken into. So Geoffrey Dickens had done everything he could to try and expose these people, but they did what they always do. They portrayed him as a nutter. He's crazy. He's got mental health problems. They said because he was put him through the foster care system, that must have messed with his mind. They did everything they could to tar him, other than be prepared to look at what was really taking place. I said to an editor about 6 years ago, the British people are not ready to be exposed to the misdeeds of our establishment, because we build our lives on ideas and foundations that we take for granted, most people would be horrified to discover the level of corruption that takes place in government, in local council, in any parts of the establishment. And so they have to protect themselves. They literally have to protect themselves. I mean, this is what politicians do. They have to protect their party, which is why Margaret Thatcher surrounded herself with paedophiles. I mean, even her own assistant was a paedophile, who Edwina Currie noted in her own book that Sir Peter Morrison was a noted pederast.
Margaret Thatcher, her political advisor, right, was a bloke called Peter Morrison, who was classed as a dangerous paedophile. He was actually classed, he had convictions, I think, to do with raping boys.
I know Barry Strevens, who was Margaret Thatcher's personal bodyguard. I have worked with the men who worked with Barry, and I have heard Barry personally say that he told Margaret Thatcher that Morrison was having parties at the weekend in his house in Cheshire with young boys, and she did nothing about it. In fact, she then followed that by making him a sir. So, and she promoted him. She promoted him within her party. Look, Jimmy Savile spent at least 12 Christmases at Chequers. You do not get to spend time with the Prime Minister unless you have been seriously vetted by the security services. I think Thatcher must have known. She must have known. I can't see how she couldn't know. And if she didn't know, then that's almost remiss on her part. She certainly was informed. And it's up to her then to explore it further. She was certainly informed that one of her closest aides was messing around with young boys. I think that would be enough information for most people to pursue.
Theresa May was given, she had 114 files of high up child abuse was given to her, right? All went missing. Geoffrey Dickens, the MP, he gave all these files on ritualistic abuse to Leon Britton. It went missing. Barbara Castle, who was the leading peer for the Labour Party, openly stated that Leon Britton should not be trusted with any information regarding child abuse, should not be trusted. This was one of the peers in Parliament, high up in the British government, is saying that our Home Secretary should not be trusted. And he was given files and it all went missing. You're seeing it with the care homes, with Michael Tarrager. What happened to his file? Oh, they had a flood, or they have a fire. It happens all the time. It's consistently happening. I have sat down, like I said to you before, with the assistant editor of the Daily Mail, and he said to me, we knew about Leon Britton, but we couldn't do anything. Every time for 10 years we've been trying to put a story out and it just doesn't go anywhere.
I mean, Lord Janner was an outrageous situation. He's now dead, right? He was 33 young boys have said.
He played the senile card, didn't he?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He went from, in December, turning up every day to the House of Lords and collecting his £300 a day, right? To the minute that they then decided the police were going to start investigating him, suddenly he didn't attend the House of Lords anymore. Janner was in children's homes in Leicester. He's a Leicester MP for many years. 30 plus accusations. They quashed that in Parliament. And Keith Vaz was very much involved in the quashing of that in Parliament. And they gave him Janner parliamentary privilege to basically absolve himself of anything. I'm completely innocent. These rumours are awful. And that was it. And what was even worse, in parliamentary privilege, it doesn't give journalists an opportunity to ask questions. So Janner was able to say that. It went down in Hansard and that was it. And Keith Vaz was very much behind that. And Keith Vaz, let us not forget, is somebody with a whole lot of secrets. A whole lot of secrets. That's another Mr. Teflon. The only thing we know about Keith Vaz so far is that he likes Eastern European male prostitutes. That was on the front pages of Sunday papers. We know that. But we also know that the Sun intimated that it was Keith Vaz who liked young boys and called them ragamuffins. Allegedly. paedophile information exchange mission was to legalise sex with children, and that's that. And they use lots of nice flowery wording about it, about the beauty of love between adults and children and everything, but it was really about legalising sex with children. And Harriet Harman most famously said that she wasn't aware that there was any great long-term damage done to children who engaged in sexual relations with adults. And she is now obviously very, very senior in the Labour Party.
PI, Paedophile Information Exchange. It had 370 members. Their members included an army major, someone high up in the boys brigade. There was also to do with Christian youth workers. These were men that were campaigning for sex with children and to legalise sex with an under 10-year-old child. And they classed it as consensual and loving, right? They were funded by the British government for 3 years, and they were given the protection of the NCCL, which has now gone on to become this group called Liberty. And Harriet Harman, she doesn't even apologise for it even now. She said it was just an oversight. They were taking money from PI. They even allowed PI to give a talk at one of their national conferences at the London School of Economics.
And so that was the Paedophile Information Exchange, which is throughout the establishment. They appeared to disband, but they didn't. What they did was they went underground. They still had their people in Parliament and in the establishment who were helping. And what we've seen now is a resurfacing of them, in a way, under the idea of queer theory. And queer theory has become extremely popular. And as I say, I've spent this year making a film about gender. And queer theory is now LGBTQ. So that's queer. Queer theory is it's an academic theory. It is highly unpleasant about, it's far too complex for me to go into now, but the bottom line is there is definitely an opening for relations between adults and children within it, right? And the boundaries and the barriers being erased as well, and bringing down the age of consent, right? Now, when I say this is in the establishment, I'm not messing around, okay? I will give you a real life situation that has just happened involving the National Society for the Protection of Children, right? NSPCC. In summer of this year, a trans-identified male called Munro Bergdorf, trans woman, announced that they had become an advisor at NSPCC. Well, I went mad because I know about Munro's history. This is somebody who you only need to do a cursory search on Google and you will find image after image which is pornographic. And this was an advisor to NSPCC. Anyway, we made a complaint, said, what on earth is Munro Bergdorf doing advising children? And they released Munro Bergdorf. But we went deeper and we discovered that the person who had brought Munro into NSPCC was a guy called, I believe, James Making. And James Making had published photos online of him in his rubber suit, masturbating, saying, I'm at work in the toilet, right? He was at NSPCC masturbating in the toilet in his rubber suit. So these are people who are still around our parliament that we're still paying for, who have questions to answer about the systemic and maintained abuse of children over many decades. Yewtree and everything started as a consequence of the Jimmy Savile revelations of Tom Watson standing up in the House of Parliament and saying that he had intelligence that there was a paedophile ring linked to Parliament, and David Cameron saying we will look into this. And then you've got all the investigations came about, YouTube's loads of them. But Yewtree essentially went after all the 70s entertainers. And I only laugh, not because I think it's funny, it's just because I can't believe that we keep sucking this up. It's like, weren't we supposed to be looking at politicians? How did we end up with that lot? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like
sacrificial lambs.
Always. And it's not okay. They're literally, that since 2012, there has not been one arrest, one conviction of a politician. And even statistically, it's not possible that there aren't paedophiles walking around Parliament. Even statistically.
But you cannot take the Andrew situation with Epstein in isolation from the royal family, Prince Charles in particular, connection to Jimmy Savile. So just let's take a breath and look at it again. We have a single family operating out of London, and somehow one of them gets involved with a major paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous in the United States and further afield. And another one gets involved for decades as a close friend of Jimmy Savile in this country, who was a historic level paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. Are you having a laugh? But this is the whole thing, you know. Just look. I mean, Savile was an inner bosom buddy of the inner circle of the royal family for decades. Brought in there. This is another coincidence, by the way. Nothing to worry about. In the 1960s, in his own words, by Lord Mountbatten, who I've been pointing out for a long time was a paedophile. And of course, this year a book came out using information from Freedom of Information requests to the FBI, where at the FBI documents we're talking about Mountbatten being a paedophile. So a paedophile takes a historic paedophile into the royal family, becomes a decades-long friend of Prince Charles, and the same family then have another a brother, Prince Andrew, who gets involved in one of the most high-profile paedophiles and procurers of children in America. And we're supposed to think this is all a coincidence.
Prince Charles had this really strong relationship with Jimmy Savile. I read Princess Di's book in her own words, and she said she thought Savile was creepy. The royals brought him in to give marriage guidance to them. And there were reports given to the police over the years about Savile's activity, but it never came out until after he died. Do you think that there was a conspiracy to keep that concealed until after his death? That because he had these powerful relationships like what Prince Andrew had with Epstein?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance that if there's sensitive information appertaining to a senior politician or member of the royal family, that is withheld or you know, it's pushed under, because obviously, again, it all comes back to the threshold, is it in the public interest? That's what they use, public interest. And then you've got PII, public interest immunity, which is what if they don't want to give information out, they'll hide behind that. There's a lot of different things they can do. Covering up criminal offences, I would say back in the 70s and 80s, that was clear that when you look now at the sex scandals that are going on with paedophiles, it was clear that those things did happen. Was
Savile entering the palace under your watch, or was that a different era?
No, he was. I remember him coming a couple of times when I was there. And to be fair, he was quite fun. He was quite a funny person. He was quite amenable. So when you look at him, when you look at him there, if you saw him walking down the street, you think that's a sex case, wouldn't you? You know, in the shiny tracksuit, in the little tiny shorts, you'd think he was he looks like a.
You'd see it now, but back then we all grew up on Savile, didn't we? We thought he was funny, a caricature.
You see him, you know, but he was quite funny, and we all liked him. To be fair, you didn't think he was a creepy character, but then that's the facade, isn't it? A lot of paedophiles are the very same. They've got a split personality, and for no one would have believed about Savile, and this is a problem a lot of their victims had when they were piping up. Who was really going to believe them against, you know, Sir Jimmy?
What the Savile situation was, because it came out in the public arena, it was a little doorway. And staggering, given that he was a record-breaking paedophile, staggering it may be for me to say, but it's true, a tiny doorway, because this thing is vast.
And I do believe that Savile was a procurer of children. I think that was very much his role. If you actually look back at old footage, he's not hiding anything. He was literally in plain sight. He's very clear. But I think that his job, he had too much access in Parliament and royals. If you can walk into Buckingham Palace and you can just take in a child that you want to film, and you just go to, you know, which he does, and which I mentioned in the documentary, and he sees, and I don't know if you remember that clip, but it's very dodgy, because he says when he realises that he's saying something a bit too open on a chat show, he starts to try and turn it into a joke, and he doubles back, he comes back, and he squashes his words. But what he's actually saying is that Prince Philip says, you know, put the kid away. That's what he says Prince Philip says. What? What?
Bishop Ball was a member of Archbishop Carey's. He was, I think, the Bishop of Lewes down in Sussex in the south coast of the UK, and he was raping boys. And who was his best friend? Prince Charles.
And this goes into the very top of society. The ratio of paedophiles and Satanists in the upper echelons of the societal hierarchy is vastly greater in the general population. There's a lot in the general population, but in the upper level, the ratio is ridiculous. And so you look at the Savile story, and it was that window. So I remember Jimmy Savile as a kid, and he was a disc jockey. They called him a disc jockey. He was a strange man. He had this white hair and all that stuff. And he became Jim will Fix It with kids and everything, And he was a strange man. Then he kind of disappeared. And he got old and old and old. And what happened to him? But it turns out that even though he had no obvious income stream after he dropped out of being a famous so-called entertainer, he had houses all over the place. He had loads of cars. He had a Bentley and all this stuff. Where's the money coming from? What was lost in the revelations about Jimmy Savile is the reason that he got away with it. He was a procurer of children for the rich and famous. That's how he got away with it. And they had to watch his back to watch their own. And so he would provide children for these rich and famous people. This is why he was on very friendly terms with Ted Heath. Then you look at the other area of that Savile story that's never been explored, which absolutely should be, and it is this. In Savile's own words, in the 1960s, Lord Mountbatten, a known paedophile, invites Savile, who's a disc jockey, into the heart of the British royal family. It's how he became a close friend of Prince Charles, a close friend for a long time until they fell out, of Prince Philip, and in the inner circle, including the Queen. Sorry, I'm banging that. And he remained in that inner centre of the circle, the inner circle of the royal family, right up to his death, basically, and a friend of Charles right up to his death. You can't cough anywhere near the Queen without the security forces know about it and special branch know about it. The police clearly knew, because they interviewed him a number of times, that Jimmy Savile was a paedophile. And he's allowed into the inner circle of the British royal family, and special branch and MI5 are not screaming, what's going on? He's a paedophile. What are you doing allowing him in there? No. He's allowed, while being interviewed by the police from time to time over paedophilia, to be in the inner circle of the royal family. But they got away with it because the system watches its own back. The rings are very, very efficient in the way they work. They are well honed. They have their backs watched. One of the reasons they didn't... they never got Savile, although there were some people that tried, is because he threatened legal action. And then there was a guy called Peter Morrison, MP in Chester, who was a close bosom buddy of Margaret Thatcher throughout her prime ministerial period and before she became leader of the Conservative Party, who was a known paedophile. Edwina Currie, a Conservative MP, in her diaries, said that she was worried, in one of her diary entries, she was worried that Peter Morrison was going to be given a job by Margaret Thatcher that might be damaging the Conservative Party because, of course, he's a known paedophile. And she says in the diary that Norman Tebbit, who was chairman of the Conservative Party, had talked to to talk to the MP, Peter Morrison, about his paedophile activities, but Peter Morrison promised to be discreet. So now we have it in Edwina Curry's own diary. The chairman of the Conservative Party knew this guy was a paedophile. And I remember the former Daily Mirror editor saying they wanted to get Peter Morrison for his paedophilia, but he always threatened with them with legal action. So now you have a paedophile, Peter Morrison, who was a very close associate and supporter and bosom buddy of Margaret Thatcher. You have Lord McAlpine, who was the Svengali and money maker for the campaigns of Margaret Thatcher. And you had Margaret Thatcher, who was a close friend of Jimmy Savile, who was a close friend of the British royal family. It's a cesspit, Sean. A frickin' cesspit. And we have to have the bollocks to say so.
There's a lot of Tory Conservative MPs have been exposed, like Leon Britton. Leon Britton was the youngest ever promoted MP to Home Secretary since Winston Churchill. At the age of 43 years old, he was given this position just a couple of clicks down from Prime Minister. Right? Leon Britton's name crops up time and time again, and I've heard it within the police environment that this man is heavily involved in young boys. He was stopped by his protection team in Victoria Station because he was trying to procure young boys, because these boys were runaways, you know, from care homes, from abuse within the family, and would gravitate towards London, and they would be picked up from train stations. Savile was picking them up from King's Cross. Victoria Station was another one, Charing Cross. These were hubs where these kids would come in. So we take Leon Britton, and he would have been vetted. The vetting process would have been there. The intelligence services would have got involved, right? Yet nothing ever came out. Peter Heyman, he becomes Sir Peter Heyman. He was in a group, he worked with a bloke called, he was in with a paedophile group. Peter Heyman was a member of PI. Now, Peter Heyman was head of MI6. He was the High Commissioner for Canada, and then he was head of MI6. So we've got MI6 giving out the D notices. And their boss is a paedophile, or was a paedophile, and he was known paedophile. Right, now, I want to give you an analogy. I'll just go on about Peter Wrighton. Peter Wrighton was one of the UK's most senior social workers, a paedophile, a convicted paedophile. He wrote a thesis on how to look after children, right? How to look after children. And that was still used up until the early 2000s as the Bible for social work. And it was written by a paedophile.
I think people have to realise sometimes we don't need people to actually tell us in black and white the answer. All we have to do is look at the actions. Now, the actions are, run it through. No MP has ever been arrested or tried for crimes against children. No member of the royal family, even though these rumours have been going on for a long time, and I would say they are far more than rumours. I would say that there is substantial evidence. So the actions are that the establishment, whatever establishment that is, British establishment, American establishment, whatever, will always gather round and protect itself.
And it's time for things to change now. It's time for these stories to get out there. You know, and I always say this to shine a light into the darkness where those stories of injustice and abuse have hidden for so long.
There's an old expression that one of the suffragettes said, and that is courage calls to courage everywhere. And the moment that people start to speak out, it gives other people the courage to come forward and say their piece.
What are you going to do about it to prevent this happening again? You see, this is my point about Operation Conifer. They've done a report on the investigation and the findings. It's on the internet. It costs £1 million of taxpayers' money to do that investigation. The report has hardly been referred to by the government. it's been put on the back shelf, and the government has instead gone on about Carl Beach. If the government was actually wanting to do something about VIP abuses, they would have followed up that report that they spent so much money on to act against other VIPs. That report in itself proves that VIP abuse exists.
I mean, what the British public have got to do is wake up. They have to wake up. People want justice, and with justice comes healing. And now we are even slamming the door on justice, and we are doing it deliberately, and this government is doing it deliberately. And MI5 are hugely complicit in it, Special branch are hugely complicit in it, and these inquiries are just gatekeeping the information, and it's got to stop.